The antique clock in the corner of the grand dining room struck 8, its chimes echoing against the silence of the cavernous space. Donna Isabella sat at the head of the long, polished table, a soft light from the crystal chandelier illuminating her lined face. She had prepared a feast, arroz con pollo, empanadas, and her famous flan, all dishes her children had loved when they were younger. Now the food sat untouched, cooling under silver covers. She glanced at her phone for the 100th time that evening. No calls. No messages. Her heart ached. Her eldest son, Sebastian, had once promised her he'd never miss her birthday. He had broken that promise 5 years ago and hadn't kept it since. She could imagine him now, pacing the glass-walled office of his skyscraper, barking orders into his Bluetooth headset, too consumed by the numbers on his screens to remember the numbers on her cake. Lucia, her middle child, had sent a rushed text earlier in the day, "Happy birthday, Mama. Paris is crazy, but I'll call soon." Of course, the call never came. Lucia's glamorous life as a fashion designer seemed to exist in a different universe, far from the humble values Isabella had tried to instill. And Raphael, her youngest, hadn't been in touch for months. His once bright future as a musician had crumbled into a haze of gambling and broken promises. She had tried to reach him, but each call went unanswered, each message ignored. She sighed, rising from her chair and walking toward the large bay window that overlooked the quiet garden. Outside, the moon bathed the roses in silver light. The house, once full of laughter, now felt like a mausoleum, echoing only with memories. Her eyes welled with tears and she pressed a hand to her chest, steadying herself. "I gave them everything," she whispered. "And now I have nothing." As the hours stretched on, Isabella found herself spiraling into memories of birthdays past. When Sebastian would serenade her with his guitar, when Lucia would help her bake cakes, when Raphael would drape himself in decorations and declare himself her present. Those moments felt like a lifetime ago, lost to the demands of careers, ambitions, and personal failures. But tonight something snapped inside her. She set down her glass of wine, its untouched contents shimmering in the candlelight. If her children had forgotten her, perhaps it was time to make them remember. She walked to her desk, opened a drawer and pulled out a notebook. Her hands trembled as she began to write, pouring out the plan that had been forming in her mind for weeks. "I'll give them a gift they'll never forget," she murmured to herself. Her words carried a mixture of pain and resolve. By the time she finished, the candles had burned low, their wax pooling onto the tablecloth. Isabella folded her notes into an envelope, sealing it with a flourish. She placed it in a safe, locking it securely. Then she made a phone call to her trusted lawyer, Antonio. "Antonio," she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging in her chest, "I need you to help me with something extraordinary." The next morning, the news of her death would reach Sebastian, Lucia, and Raphael. And the journey that would change their lives forever would begin. The room was shrouded in an uneasy silence, broken only by the rustle of papers as Antonio, Donna Isabella's lawyer, prepared to address the 3 siblings seated before him. The air in the old family home was thick with tension, and even the once cheerful floral wallpaper seemed to wilt under the weight of their grief, or lack thereof. Sebastian sat rigid, his tailored suit and expensive watch marking him as an outsider in the quaint surroundings. His phone buzzed on the table and he glanced at it instinctively before silencing the device with a tight jaw. "This shouldn't take long," he muttered under his breath. Lucia, dressed in a chic black coat, leaned back in her chair, her manicured nails tapping impatiently on the wooden armrest. Her gaze darted around the room, avoiding the family portraits hanging on the walls. Raphael slouched next to her, unshaven and disheveled, his bloodshot eyes betraying his sleepless nights. Antonio cleared his throat, drawing their attention. "Thank you for gathering here on such short notice. Your mother entrusted me with her final wishes, and I will now read her will." Sebastian leaned forward. "Let's get on with it," he said, his tone curt. "I have a flight to catch." Lucia shot him a glare, but Antonio ignored the interruption and began. "To my dear children, Sebastian, Lucia, and Raphael, if you are reading this, then I am no longer with you. Know that I loved you with all my heart, despite the distance that has grown between us. But love is not enough to mend what has been broken. You have all lost your way, and I cannot rest until I see you find it again." Antonio paused, glancing at the siblings. Sebastian frowned, Lucia shifted uncomfortably, and Raphael stared blankly at the table. The lawyer continued. "I have divided my estate into 3 portions, but they will not be handed to you freely. Each of you must complete a task, one that reflects the flaws I hope you will overcome and the lessons I wish for you to learn." What is this, a game? Sebastian interrupted, his voice rising. Antonio held up a hand. If you would let me finish? He read on. Sebastian, you have built an empire but forgotten the humanity behind it. To you, I leave control of a struggling community center. You must run it for 1 year without your wealth or influence, and turn it into a thriving haven for those in need. Sebastian scoffed, leaning back in his chair. This is absurd. Antonio ignored him and continued. Lucia, you have surrounded yourself with beauty but neglected your roots. You must reconnect with our extended family in the village of Santa Clara, spending 3 months among them and documenting their stories. Lucia's jaw tightened. Mama knew I don't have time for this. Antonio pressed on, undeterred. Raphael, my youngest, you have spent years running from your potential. You must rebuild your life, starting with a modest inheritance of $1,000. Use it to create a future you can be proud of without falling back into old habits. Raphael's lip curled into a bitter smile. Sounds about right, he muttered. Antonio folded the papers neatly and set them aside. There is one final condition. None of the inheritance will be released until all 3 tasks are completed. Only then will the estate be divided. Sebastian stood abruptly. You can't be serious. We're adults, not contestants on some reality show. Antonio looked him squarely in the eye. Your mother was very serious about this. She believed this was the only way to heal the fractures in your family. Lucia crossed her arms. And if we refuse? Then the entirety of the estate, including this house, will be donated to charity, Antonio replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. A heavy silence settled over the room as the weight of their mother's words sank in. For the first time, the siblings seemed to truly see each other, not as rivals or strangers but as the fractured pieces of a broken family. Finally, Raphael broke the silence, his voice laced with sarcasm. Well, looks like we're stuck with each other. Sebastian sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. Fine. I'll do it. But don't expect me to enjoy this charade. Lucia hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. If this is what Mama wanted. All eyes turned to Raphael, who smirked but eventually shrugged. Sure. Why not? It's not like I've got anything better to do. Antonio nodded. Very well. Your mother left detailed instructions for each of your tasks, which I will provide. Remember, she believed in all of you even when you didn't believe in yourselves. Don't let her down. As the siblings left the room, their minds swirled with thoughts of the impossible tasks ahead. None of them realized that this journey, born out of a mother's love and heartbreak, would change them in ways they could never imagine. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead as Sebastian stepped into the crumbling community center. The chipped paint on the walls, the faint smell of mildew, and the muffled sound of children arguing in a distant room were far removed from the sleek, glass-walled offices he was accustomed to. He adjusted his cufflinks, a futile gesture given his surroundings, and resisted the urge to turn back. Mr. Reyes? A warm but cautious voice pulled him from his thoughts. A woman with curly black hair, dressed in jeans and a slightly faded blouse, extended her hand. I'm Elena Torres, the coordinator here. I understand you'll be managing us? Temporarily, Sebastian replied, shaking her hand with practiced politeness. I'll assess the situation, implement necessary changes, and improve things. Elena tilted her head, her expression unreadable. I see. Well, let me show you around. As they walked through the center, Sebastian's jaw tightened. The facilities were a disaster. Broken chairs filled the storage room, the library consisted of a single shelf of battered books, and the gym equipment looked as though it belonged in a museum. The employees, if they could be called that, were overworked volunteers juggling multiple roles. Elena explained that funding was scarce, most of it coming from small donations and grants, and even then they were barely scraping by. Sebastian took mental notes, his business instincts kicking in. You're underfunded, disorganized, and lack a clear structure, he said bluntly as they returned to the main office. No wonder this place is failing. Elena raised an eyebrow, crossing her arms. It's easy to criticize when you don't understand what we're up against. We're not a corporation, Mr. Reyes. We're a lifeline for these kids. Sebastian waved her off. Sentiment doesn't keep the lights on. I'll secure funding, implement a proper hierarchy, and streamline operations. Give me 6 months and you won't recognize this place. Elena's lips tightened, but she said nothing, leading him to the desk that would serve as his office. It was cluttered with papers and a coffee mug that proclaimed, World's Okayest Coordinator. Sebastian sat stiffly in the creaky chair, already plotting his next steps. Over the next week, Sebastian threw himself into his self-imposed mission. He drafted proposals, contacted potential donors, and developed a meticulous budget. His business acumen was undeniable, and soon, a small influx of funding began to trickle in. He hired a part-time accountant, installed new software, and replaced the center's ancient filing cabinets with sleek, digital systems. But despite his efforts, the staff and volunteers remained wary. Sebastian's brusque manner and single-minded focus on efficiency often clashed with their approach, which prioritized relationships and community. One afternoon, Elena confronted him in the break room. "You're missing the point," she said, her voice firm but not unkind. "This place isn't just about programs and funding. It's about the people who walk through those doors every day. If you don't see them, you'll never make a real difference." Sebastian frowned, sipping his black coffee. "I see them. That's why I'm here, to fix this mess so it can actually help them." Elena sighed, shaking her head. "You think you can fix everything with money and spreadsheets. But have you even spoken to the kids? Do you know their names, their stories? Because that's what makes this place matter." Her words lingered long after she left the room. That evening, as Sebastian sat at his desk reviewing expense reports, he caught sight of a group of children playing basketball in the courtyard. Their laughter was infectious, even from behind the window, and for a moment, he felt something stir, something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. The next morning, Sebastian did something uncharacteristic. Instead of diving into his emails, he joined a group of children gathered in the art room. A boy with a mop of curly hair was hunched over a sketchpad, furiously drawing. "What are you working on?" Sebastian asked, his tone awkward but genuine. The boy glanced up, startled. "A dragon," he mumbled, holding up his drawing. It was crude but full of imagination, with flames shooting from the creature's mouth. "Impressive," Sebastian said, crouching down. "Have you thought about adding scales? It would make the dragon look even more realistic." The boy's eyes lit up. "Really? You think so?" Sebastian nodded. "Absolutely. Here, let me show you." For the first time, Sebastian felt a flicker of connection as he guided the boy's pencil. Throughout the day, he found himself drawn to other interactions. A teenage girl shyly showing him her poetry, a group of younger kids insisting he join their game of tag. By the end of the week, he was no longer just the stern man in the office. He was Sebastian, the guy who helped with drawings, listened to stories, and occasionally lost terribly at dodgeball. Weeks turned into months, and the center began to thrive in ways Sebastian hadn't anticipated. The new funding helped repair the facilities, but it was the relationships he built that truly transformed the space. Parents began volunteering, staff morale improved, and the children flourished under the renewed sense of care and stability. For Sebastian, the experience was humbling. He realized how far he had drifted from the values his mother had tried to teach him: compassion, humility, and the importance of giving back. One evening, as he stood in the freshly painted courtyard watching the kids play, he felt a pang of regret. He had been so focused on building his empire that he had forgotten what it meant to build a community. Sebastian's phone buzzed in his pocket, and he glanced at the screen. It was a message from Lucia. "How's the center? Maybe we should catch up." Smiling faintly, he typed back, "It's not what I expected. But maybe that's a good thing." As he slipped the phone back into his pocket, he felt a sense of clarity he hadn't experienced in years. His mother's challenge had been more than a task. It had been a gift, one that was slowly reshaping him into the man she had always believed he could be. Lucia shifted uncomfortably in her seat as the bus rumbled along the winding dirt road leading to Santa Clara. The picturesque village, nestled between rolling hills, was a world away from the bustling streets of Paris she called home. The thought of spending 3 months reconnecting with relatives she barely remembered filled her with dread. She had grown accustomed to the sleek elegance of her fashion world, and the idea of stepping into this rustic setting felt like being exiled. As the bus came to a stop, Lucia stepped onto the uneven ground, her designer boots instantly gathering dust. An elderly man wearing a straw hat and a wide smile waved enthusiastically. "Lucida," he called out. She hesitated before recognizing him. "Tio Matteo?" she asked, a faint smile forced onto her lips. Matteo enveloped her in a warm embrace. "Your mama would be so happy to see you here," he said, his voice tinged with emotion. "Come, the family is waiting." Lucia followed him through the village, where adobe homes lined narrow paths, and children played under the shade of fruit trees. The sights, smells, and sounds were overwhelming, a stark contrast to the sterile beauty of her Parisian life. As they approached the main house, a crowd of relatives spilled out, each one eager to greet her. "Lucida. It's been so long, one cried, pulling her into a hug. "You look just like your mama," another said, wiping a tear from her cheek. Lucia offered polite smiles and nods, but their warmth felt suffocating. She was here to complete a task, nothing more. Yet, as the evening wore on, their laughter and stories began to chip away at her defenses. The next morning, Lucia was handed her assignment, to document the stories of their family. Her great-aunt Isabel, a sharp-eyed woman with a cane, handed her a tattered notebook. "Your mama wanted you to know where you come from," Isabel said. "Our history is in these walls, in this land. It's time you learned." Lucia sighed but accepted the notebook. She began her work begrudgingly, starting with Mateo. His stories were lively and filled with humor, recounting childhood pranks and family celebrations. But it was his tale of her mother's sacrifices that stopped Lucia in her tracks. "Your mama," Mateo began, his voice softening, "she left this village so you could have more. She worked her fingers to the bone, sending money back here to help us, even when she had little for herself. She never forgot where she came from. She never forgot us." Lucia stared at him, her chest tightening. She had always known her mother worked hard, but hearing these stories from her relatives made it painfully real. She had been so consumed with her own ambitions that she had never truly understood the depth of her mother's love for their family. Over the weeks, Lucia threw herself into the project with renewed vigor. She interviewed her cousins, uncles, and aunts, piecing together a tapestry of their lives. She learned of their struggles and triumphs, their resilience in the face of hardship. Slowly, the stories began to feel less like a chore and more like a privilege. One afternoon, as she sat under a mango tree transcribing her notes, a young girl approached her. "Are you going to write about me too?" the girl asked shyly. Lucia smiled. "What's your name?" "Marisol," the girl said, sitting beside her. "Mama says you make clothes. Can you make me a dress one day?" Lucia's heart softened. "Maybe. But first, tell me your story." Marisol's eyes lit up as she launched into tales of her school days and her dreams of becoming a teacher. Her innocence and enthusiasm were infectious, reminding Lucia of a time when she had dared to dream without limits. As the months passed, Lucia found herself changing. The designer who once prided herself on perfection now found beauty in imperfection. The chipped tiles of the village square, the laughter echoing from crowded kitchens, the stories etched in weathered faces. She began to sketch designs inspired by her surroundings. Vibrant patterns drawn from the fields, flowing silhouettes echoing the rhythm of daily life. Her relatives noticed the shift. "You're different, Lucida," Isabel said one evening as they sat by the fire. "Your mama would be proud." Lucia blinked back tears. For the first time in years she felt connected, not just to her family but to herself. As her departure loomed, Lucia compiled the stories into a bound book, presenting it to the family during a farewell gathering. "This is for all of you," she said, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "And for Mama. She wanted me to understand, and now I do." The room fell silent before erupting into applause and hugs. Even Mateo, usually stoic, wiped at his eyes. "You're one of us, Lucida," he said. "Never forget that." As Lucia boarded the bus back to the city, her heart felt full in a way she hadn't thought possible. She glanced at her phone and hesitated before typing a message to Sebastian and Raphael. "We need to talk. I have so much to share." For the first time, she wasn't running from her family. She was running toward them. The seedy casino buzzed with the hum of slot machines and the murmur of desperate gamblers. Raphael sat slumped at the bar, swirling the last sip of whiskey in his glass. His reflection in the cracked mirror behind the bar was unrecognizable, sunken eyes, disheveled hair, and the weight of years of bad decisions etched into his features. The bartender set down another drink, but Raphael pushed it away. He knew he couldn't afford it. Not anymore. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Pulling it out, he read the message from Antonio. "The $1,000 has been deposited into your account. Your mother believed in you, Raphael. Prove her right." Raphael let out a bitter laugh. $1,000? It wouldn't even cover the debt he owed the burly men watching him from across the room. But there was something about Antonio's words that stuck with him. "Your mother believed in you." He stood abruptly, pocketing his phone, and walked out into the cold night air. He wasn't sure where he was going, but he knew he couldn't stay there. The next morning, Raphael found himself in a dingy motel room, staring at the meager sum in his bank account. He had no plan, no prospects, and no idea how to begin again. All he knew was that the money wasn't meant to fix his problems, it was meant to rebuild his life. And that was something he hadn't done in years. He spent the first few days wandering the city, looking for opportunities. But with no steady job history and a reputation as a gambler, doors slammed shut as quickly as they opened. His frustration mounted, and the temptation to return to his old ways grew stronger with every rejection. It wasn't until he stumbled across a rundown music store that something shifted. The dusty guitars hanging in the window reminded him of who he used to be, the passionate young musician who dreamed of sharing his songs with the world. He pushed the door open, and the smell of aged wood and leather greeted him like an old friend. "Looking for something?" the gruff shopkeeper asked, eyeing Raphael warily. "Not sure," Raphael admitted. His gaze fell on a battered acoustic guitar. "How much for that one?" The shopkeeper shrugged. $50. It's seen better days." Raphael handed over the cash, cradling the guitar in his arms. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Raphael spent the next few weeks busking on street corners, playing songs he hadn't touched in years. At first, the crowds were sparse, mostly passers-by who tossed spare change without stopping. But as Raphael poured more of himself into the music, something began to change. His voice, once rusty and hesitant, grew stronger. His fingers, clumsy at first, found their rhythm, and people began to listen. One afternoon, a woman approached him as he packed up his guitar. "You're good," she said, slipping a business card into his hand. "My cafe hosts live music on weekends. Call me if you're interested." Raphael stared at the card, a flicker of hope sparking in his chest. He called her the next day and booked his first gig. It wasn't much, a small crowd and a modest paycheck, but it was more than he had expected. For the first time in years he felt a glimmer of pride. As his confidence grew, Raphael began to write songs again. The words came slowly at first, but they carried the weight of his experiences, the pain, the regret, and the longing for redemption. He poured his heart into every note, and his performances reflected that raw honesty. Word began to spread. More cafes and small venues reached out, and soon Raphael was playing regularly. The modest income allowed him to pay off some of his debts, and though the process was slow, he began to see a path forward. One evening, after a particularly emotional performance, Raphael received an unexpected visitor. A young man barely out of his teens approached him with wide eyes. "I just wanted to say thank you," the man said, his voice trembling. "Your music, it helped me. I've been going through some stuff, and your songs made me feel like I'm not alone." Raphael was stunned. He had always thought of his music as a personal outlet, a way to heal himself. He hadn't considered the impact it might have on others. "Thank you," he said quietly, shaking the man's hand. "That means more than you know." As the young man walked away, Raphael felt something he hadn't felt in years: purpose. He wasn't just rebuilding his life for himself. He was creating something meaningful, something his mother would have been proud of. Months later, Raphael stood on the small stage of a community theater, looking out at the crowd that had gathered for his first solo concert. His siblings, Sebastian and Lucia, sat in the front row, their faces filled with pride. Raphael took a deep breath, gripping the neck of his guitar. "This next song is for my mama," he said into the microphone, his voice steady. "She believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. This is for her." As the first chords rang out, Raphael poured every ounce of his heart into the music. And for the first time he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. The morning sun cast long shadows across the patio of Dona Isabella's home, now occupied only by memories and Antonio's steady visits to manage her estate. On the same morning, 3 letters, delivered by courier, arrived in Paris, New York, and Raphael's modest apartment in the city. Each envelope bore the unmistakable handwriting of Dona Isabella, as if her presence reached beyond the grave. Sebastian opened his letter first, seated at his pristine desk, surrounded by order and efficiency. The familiar cursive brought a pang of nostalgia. Lucia, perched in her atelier, set aside her sketches, her brow furrowing at the envelope in her hands. Raphael, still groggy from a late-night gig, tore his open haphazardly, the scent of her favorite lavender stationery washing over him. Inside the letters read, "My dearest children, though I am no longer with you, I hope you feel my love in these words. It brings me joy to know you are each walking the paths I set for you, even if they are difficult. Remember, the trials are not about what you accomplish but who you become in the process. I have one request of you: write to one another. Share your struggles, your triumphs, your thoughts. You are my greatest legacy, and I believe that together, you will find the strength to heal what has been broken. With all my love, Mom." At first, the siblings resisted. Sebastian was too busy managing the community center's many crises. Lucia hesitated, unsure how to bridge the years of distance. Raphael dismissed the idea entirely, feeling awkward about pouring his thoughts onto paper. But something about their mother's request nagged at each of them. Slowly, reluctantly, they began to write. Sebastian's letter to Lucia. Lucia, I know we've never been close. We're too different, or maybe I've always been too stubborn to see the things we share. Running the community center is harder than I imagined. The people here, they need so much more than I ever thought I could give. I've learned something about myself. I've spent my life chasing success, thinking it would make me worthy. But I'm realizing that worth isn't something you earn. It's something you recognize. I think Mama was trying to teach me that all along. How is the family in Santa Clara? I imagine they've welcomed you with open arms. Sebastian. Lucia's response to Sebastian. Sebastian? I wasn't sure what to expect in Santa Clara, but being here has changed me. Our family is amazing, so much strength and love despite everything they've been through. It makes me wonder if I've been hiding behind my career to avoid real connections. I'm glad to hear you're finding purpose at the center. I think Mama saw something in us that we couldn't see in ourselves. I spoke to Raphael recently. He told me about his music. You should write to him. I think he needs to hear from you. Lucia. Sebastian hesitated before writing to Raphael, but he knew Lucia was right. Raphael's reply, when it came, was uncharacteristically heartfelt. Raphael's letter to Sebastian. Seb. Thanks for reaching out. I didn't think you'd care much about what I'm doing, but it means a lot. Music is helping me get my life back on track, and for the first time I feel like I have a future. I hear you're working at a community center. That's unexpected, but honestly it sounds like something Mama would have been proud of. Maybe we're not as different as I thought. Take care of yourself, brother. Raf. The letters became a lifeline. Through their shared words, the siblings began to rediscover each other. Sebastian shared the story of a young boy at the center who reminded him of Raphael's rebellious spirit. Lucia described how she felt closer to their mother as she pieced together the family's history. Raphael confessed his struggles with self-doubt and how playing for others gave him a sense of purpose. One evening, after receiving a particularly emotional letter from Lucia, Sebastian sat in his small office and reread his mother's will. For the first time, he didn't see it as a burden but as a chance, a gift to rebuild what had been lost. He drafted a letter to his siblings, inviting them to visit the center for a special event he was organizing, a fundraiser to support the children. Lucia and Raphael accepted without hesitation, and their responses carried a sense of anticipation, a desire to bridge the gaps that had grown between them. When the three finally reunited at the community center, the awkwardness was palpable at first. But as the evening wore on, the familiar rhythms of sibling banter emerged. They laughed, teased, and shared stories of their challenges, each recognizing the changes in the others. I never thought I'd see you running a charity, Raphael said to Sebastian, smirking. You're like a saint now. And I never thought you'd stop gambling long enough to write music, Sebastian shot back, grinning. Lucia smiled, watching them. Mama would be proud of us, she said softly. Of all of us. Sebastian nodded. She believed in us even when we didn't believe in each other, or ourselves. Raphael raised a glass of lemonade. To Mama. The others echoed him, their voices steady, their bond beginning to mend. The siblings gathered in Dona Isabella's old study, a room steeped in memory. The wooden shelves overflowed with books, and the faint scent of lavender lingered, a reminder of their mother's quiet presence. It was Lucia who found the journal, tucked away in a drawer of Isabella's mahogany desk. The leather cover was worn, the pages yellowed with age. Is this? She began, holding it up. Sebastian nodded, his expression solemn. It must be hers. Raphael leaned against the doorway, his arms crossed. What do you think she wrote in there? Lucia opened the journal carefully, as if it might fall apart in her hands. Her eyes scanned the first page and she read aloud, To my children, if you're reading this, it means I am no longer with you. But my love remains as strong as it has always been. Her voice caught, and Sebastian reached out, gently taking the journal from her. Let me, he said, his tone steady but reverent. He turned to the next entry. November 15, 2005. Sebastian came to visit today. He's always so busy, so driven. I worry that he's chasing success at the expense of happiness. I see the weight he carries, the need to prove himself to everyone, especially to his father's memory. I wish he could see that he doesn't need to prove anything to me. To me, he's enough just as he is. Sebastian's jaw tightened and he looked away, the words striking deep. He passed the journal to Raphael. May 3, 2010. Raphael called from the city. He sounded tired. I know he's struggling, but he wouldn't admit it. He's so much like his father, proud, stubborn, and passionate. I wish I could help him see the beauty in himself, the gift he has to touch lives with his music. He's lost now, but I believe he'll find his way. My faith in him has never wavered." Raphael's eyes glistened and he let out a shaky breath. "She always believed in me," he said quietly. "Even when I gave her every reason not to." He handed the journal back to Lucia, who flipped to another entry. June 27, 2013. Lucia sent me photos from her show in Paris. She looked radiant, like she had finally found her place in the world. But I wonder if she's truly happy. She has always been so determined to escape the shadows of this family, to carve out her own path. I hope she knows that her roots are not something to run from, they are something to carry with her, to anchor her. I wish I could tell her how proud I am." Lucia's fingers trembled as she closed the journal, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. "She knew us better than we knew ourselves," she whispered. "She saw everything." They sat in silence for a long time, the weight of Isabella's words settling over them. The journal was filled with more entries, each one a snapshot of their mother's love and quiet observations. It was clear that her sacrifices had been made with hope, her strength drawn from her unwavering belief in her children. Sebastian broke the silence. "We were so caught up in our own lives that we forgot her. But she never forgot us." Lucia nodded, her voice thick with emotion. "She wanted us to see each other the way she saw us. And to see ourselves the way she did," Raphael added, his voice soft. As the evening stretched on, they took turns reading entries aloud, piecing together the story of their mother's life and the love that had driven her to create the trials they now faced. Her journal was more than a collection of thoughts. It was a blueprint for their redemption, a reminder of the bond they had once shared and could rebuild. By the time they closed the journal, the siblings felt a sense of unity they hadn't experienced in years. The wounds of the past were still there, but they were no longer insurmountable. They had their mother's words to guide them, and for the first time, they truly understood the depth of her love. Sebastian stood, the journal clutched tightly in his hand. "We have to finish what she started," he said. "For her and for us." Lucia and Raphael nodded, their resolve reflected in their eyes. Together they would honor Isabella's legacy, not just by completing their tasks but by rebuilding the family she had always believed they could be. The reunion at their mother's home had left Sebastian, Lucia, and Raphael with a renewed sense of purpose. But as they returned to their respective challenges, the weight of their tasks grew heavier, testing not only their resolve but their fragile reconnection. Sebastian sat in his small office, a mountain of paperwork spread before him. The fundraiser he had organized had been a modest success, but it wasn't enough to cover the mounting expenses of the community center. Repairs were incomplete, and a recent inspection had revealed code violations that threatened to shut the center down entirely. The children's voices echoed faintly from the hall, a reminder of what was at stake. But instead of motivating him, it made Sebastian feel more trapped. He had done everything he could think of, drafted new grant proposals, approached local businesses for donations, even appealed to his old corporate contacts. Nothing seemed to work. Late one night, as he stared at the center's dwindling bank account, he caught himself considering a loan. It would require dipping into his personal savings, a financial risk he had sworn never to take. The thought made his stomach churn. "Mama believed in me," he muttered under his breath. But for the first time he wasn't sure he believed in himself. Lucia stood in the village square, her sketchbook tucked under one arm. The stories she had collected from her relatives filled her with a strange mixture of pride and inadequacy. They had entrusted her with their lives, their memories, but what if she couldn't do them justice? Her sketches, once confident and flowing, now felt stilted and uninspired. Each time she put pencil to paper, doubt crept in, whispering that she wasn't enough, that her designs would never capture the spirit of Santa Clara. Her relatives noticed the shift in her demeanor. "Lucita," Tio Matteo said one evening, "you carry too much on your shoulders. Your mama didn't ask you to create perfection. She just wanted you to be present." Lucia nodded absently, but his words offered little comfort. Perfection was all she had ever known to strive for. Anything less felt like failure. Raphael paced the cramped backstage area of a small club, his guitar slung over his shoulder. He had been booked as the opening act for a local band, a big step forward for his music career. But as he peeked through the curtains at the crowd, his heart sank. The audience was sparse and uninterested, most of them glued to their phones or chatting over drinks. The old insecurities clawed at him, and his mind drifted to the gamblers and loan sharks he had left behind. What if they were right? What if he was nothing more than a washed-up failure? After his set, which was met with polite but lukewarm applause, Raphael retreated to the bar. The temptation to drown his disappointment was overwhelming. The bartender set down a whiskey in front of him, but Raphael stared at it for a long time, his mother's voice echoing in his mind, "I believe in you, Raphael. Don't give up on yourself." He pushed the glass away and walked out into the night, his hands trembling with both relief and regret. The siblings' frustrations reached a boiling point during a video call that Sebastian had organized. "This isn't working," Sebastian snapped, his voice clipped. "The center's about to shut down and I can't fix it on my own." Lucia crossed her arms. "You think you're the only one struggling? I'm supposed to represent this family's legacy, and I can't even put a decent sketch together." Raphael, who had been silent until now, let out a bitter laugh. "At least you two have something to show for your efforts. I'm out here playing to half-empty rooms, wondering if this whole thing is even worth it." Sebastian's eyes narrowed. "Maybe if you hadn't wasted years gambling, you'd be further along." "Don't lecture me, Mr. Perfect," Raphael shot back. "You're just mad because you can't throw money at your problems this time." "Enough," Lucia interrupted, her voice rising. "We're all failing, okay? But fighting isn't going to solve anything." A heavy silence followed her outburst. For the first time in weeks, the distance between them felt insurmountable. After the call, each sibling retreated into their own thoughts. Sebastian stared at the community center's empty halls, the laughter of the children now a distant memory. Lucia flipped through her sketches, the lines blurring as tears filled her eyes. Raphael sat in his apartment, his guitar untouched, the silence deafening. But amidst their despair, they each remembered their mother's journal. Her words had been a beacon before, and now they turned to it once more. Sebastian read, "When the burden feels too heavy, remember that you are never alone. Lean on each other as I have always leaned on you." Lucia found comfort in an entry that read, "Perfection is not the goal. Love and effort are enough." And Raphael reread the words that had carried him this far, "You are stronger than you think, my son." The following day, Lucia sent a group message. "I think Mama was trying to teach us something we've been avoiding. Let's stop pretending we can do this alone. Let's help each other." To her relief, Sebastian and Raphael responded almost immediately. Sebastian wrote, "Agreed. I have some ideas we can discuss." Raphael added, "I'm in. Let's figure this out together." For the first time, the siblings began to see their challenges not as isolated tasks but as interconnected pieces of a greater lesson. They realized that their mother's final wish wasn't just about personal growth, it was about rebuilding the family they had once been. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a golden glow over the courtyard of the community center. Children played in the yard, their laughter echoing in the warm evening air, while parents milled about helping set up tables and decorations for the fundraiser. It was the largest event Sebastian had planned yet, and though he was nervous about the outcome, a spark of hope flickered in his chest. His siblings would be arriving soon, and for the first time in years he felt they might actually face their challenges together. Lucia was the first to arrive, stepping out of a cab with her arms full of small parcels. She had spent weeks creating custom designs inspired by the stories she had collected in Santa Clara, and now she had brought them as part of her contribution to the fundraiser. "You made it," Sebastian said, greeting her with an awkward but heartfelt hug. Lucia smiled. "Of course I did. I even brought a little Santa Clara magic to help." She opened one of the parcels, revealing intricately embroidered scarves and vibrant prints. "For the auction," she added. Before Sebastian could respond, a familiar voice called out, "I hope you saved the best spot for your headliner." They turned to see Raphael stepping out of an old sedan, his guitar case slung over his shoulder. He looked different, more confident, more grounded. "I figured I'd provide the soundtrack," he said with a grin. Sebastian clapped a hand on his shoulder. "Glad you're here, Raph." Lucia joined them, and for a moment the three of them stood together, their smiles tentative but genuine. It felt like the first step toward something new. The fundraiser began in earnest as the courtyard filled with guests. Parents browsed Lucia's creations, marveling at the craftsmanship and the stories behind each piece. Raphael took the stage, his rich voice and heartfelt songs captivating the crowd. Meanwhile, Sebastian moved through the event, coordinating volunteers and ensuring everything ran smoothly. For the first time, the siblings worked as a team. Lucia's art brought in significant bids at the auction, Raphael's music drew donations, and Sebastian's meticulous planning ensured the event exceeded expectations. The synergy was undeniable, and as the night wore on, it became clear they were achieving something far greater than they had imagined. After the last guest had left, the siblings sat together in the now quiet courtyard. Raphael strummed his guitar idly, while Lucia leaned back in her chair, gazing at the string lights above. Sebastian sat with the fundraiser's ledger open, a rare smile on his face. "We did it," he said, his voice soft with amazement. "The center's going to make it? And you did it without throwing money at the problem," Raphael teased, earning a laugh from Lucia. Sebastian smirked. "I had some help." Lucia turned to her brothers, her expression serious. "Do you think Mama knew this would happen? That we'd finally figure out how to be a family again?" Raphael nodded slowly. "She always believed in us. Even when we didn't believe in each other." Sebastian looked down at the ledger, his throat tightening. "I wish we could tell her." Lucia reached for his hand. "We are telling her, Seb. Through everything we're doing." As they prepared to leave the courtyard, Antonio arrived, holding an envelope. "I thought tonight would be the perfect time to share this," he said, handing it to Sebastian. Inside was a letter from Isabella. Sebastian unfolded it carefully and began to read aloud. "My beloved children, I knew you could do it. You've proven to yourselves, and to each other, that you are capable of so much more than you believed. Watching you grow through this process has been my greatest joy. But my work is not yet done. I have one final request. Come back to the family home together. There is something waiting for you. With all my love, Mom." The siblings exchanged curious glances, a mixture of excitement and trepidation filling the air. The next morning they drove back to the family estate. The house, once a source of tension and unspoken grief, now felt like a place of possibility. Inside they found another letter on the dining table along with a set of keys. Sebastian read the letter aloud. "This home is yours now to share and care for as a family. It is a symbol of everything we have built together. Use it not as a reminder of what was lost, but as a foundation for what is to come. And know that I am always with you." Tears streamed down their faces as they stood in the familiar space, their mother's presence palpable. They decided to honor her by turning the house into a community hub, a place where art, music, and service could flourish, just as she would have wanted. As they stood together in the garden, the morning sun bathing them in light, they felt something they hadn't felt in years: peace. The trials they had faced, the pain they had endured, it had all led to this moment. They were no longer three fractured individuals but a family, bound by love and a shared purpose. Raphael broke the silence with a grin. "So who's ready to paint this place? Because it could use some serious work?" Lucia laughed. "Only if I get to pick the colors." Sebastian chuckled, shaking his head. "Fine. But no glitter." Their laughter echoed through the garden, a testament to their transformation. Together they had found their way back to each other, and they knew that Isabella's legacy would continue to guide them. The house buzzed with life again, but this time it wasn't just a family home, it was a beacon of purpose. The siblings worked tirelessly to transform the space, drawing from their newfound strengths. Raphael turned one of the sunrooms into a music studio, welcoming local kids eager to learn guitar. Lucia converted an old drawing room into an art workshop, filling it with easels, paints, and the vibrant designs inspired by her time in Santa Clara. Sebastian organized the logistics, creating schedules and coordinating volunteers to run community programs. Months after their journey began, the estate was no longer a symbol of their fractured past but a vibrant center of connection and creativity. On a bright Saturday morning, the siblings stood in the garden, watching as children played and neighbors mingled during the estate's grand opening as the Isabella Foundation. "I think we did it," Raphael said, leaning on his guitar case with a grin. "Mama would be proud." Sebastian nodded, surveying the bustling scene. "She would. But we didn't just do it for her. We did it for us." Lucia smiled. "And for everyone who steps through those doors." Later that evening, after the guests had left, the siblings gathered in the library. Antonio had arrived with one final surprise. He placed a small, intricately carved wooden box on the table and handed them a letter from Isabella. Lucia unfolded the letter and began to read aloud. "My beloved children, if you are reading this, then you have accomplished everything I hoped for, and more. You have shown resilience, courage, and most of all, love. This journey was never about the inheritance or the tasks. It was about finding your way back to each other. That has always been my greatest wish. Inside this box you will find a gift, one that I hope will remind you of the strength you've discovered and the love that binds you together. Forever yours, Mom." With trembling hands, Raphael opened the box. Inside were 3 delicate pendants, each shaped like a heart but uniquely engraved with a word: faith, hope, and love. Sebastian picked up the pendant marked faith. "She always had faith in us, even when we didn't deserve it." Lucia held the one engraved with hope. She never gave up hope even when we lost ours. Raphael turned the pendant marked love over in his hands. And she loved us even when we forgot how to love ourselves and each other. As they sat together in the quiet library, a gentle breeze wafted through the open window, carrying the scent of lavender. For a fleeting moment, it felt as though Isabella was there with them, her warmth and strength enveloping them like a protective embrace. "I think she's watching us," Lucia said softly, glancing toward the window. "She always was," Sebastian replied, his voice steady. Raphael nodded. "And she always will be." Months turned into years and the Isabella Foundation flourished. It became a haven for those in need, a place where art, music, and support brought people together. The siblings, once divided by distance and pain, became the cornerstone of its success, each contributing their unique gifts. Sebastian, now a leader with compassion and humility, ran the foundation's operations, ensuring its future. Lucia continued to bring color and creativity, using her platform to highlight the stories of their family and community. Raphael's music resonated far and wide, inspiring others to find their voice and rebuild their lives. Their mother's legacy wasn't just a house or an inheritance. It was the love she had sown in each of them, the belief that even the most broken bonds could be healed with time and effort. As the story comes to a close, a question lingers: what does legacy mean to you? Is it the wealth we leave behind or the love we pass on? Donna Isabella's greatest inheritance wasn't her estate, it was her unwavering faith in her children's ability to find their way back to each other. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to share your thoughts. Would you have gone to such lengths to reconnect with your family? And how would you define your own legacy? If this narrative resonated with you, please like and share it with others. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your perspective on love, redemption, and the bonds of family.